He was a pathological narcissist. People were dying at the rate of 9,000 a day, and he's in there writing about whether he's going to be on all the network news. He's the most famous person in the world. He covered up from the American people that the virus originated at this Wuhan lab because he had a hand in research in China. He was wrong about the efficacy of the vaccination. He got himself a side effect of it and lied about it. He had an embolism, basically.
Hello. Welcome to Victor Davis Hanson in his own words. This is our Friday News Roundup, and we've got lots on the agenda today. I know Jack and Victor talked a little bit about Fauci, but we're going to look at the Fauci diaries. Rand Paul has been doing a public service for the United States. And then we'll talk about Mamdani and his doxing of wealthy people with second houses. Some of them not even wealthy. Stay with us, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Female athletes are being forced to compete against biological males, sometimes without their consent or even their knowledge. In Washington, high school sophomore Callie Keeler was sexually assaulted on the wrestling mat during a tournament. Only afterward did she learn her opponent was a boy who identifies as a girl. With the help of Alliance Defending Freedom, Callie is bravely suing the state over a policy that not only allows males to compete in girls' high school sports, but doesn't require schools to disclose that information to female athletes or their parents. Don't let schools put gender ideology over the safety of girls in sports. Your support today can help fight for Callie and other athletes like her. And for a limited time, your first gift to ADF will be doubled by a special matching grant while funds last. Text Hanson to 83848 or go to joinadf.com/Hanson to have your gift doubled.
Welcome back. Victor is the Martin and Neely Anderson Senior Fellow in Military History and Classics at the Hoover Institution and the Wayne and Marcia Buskey Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College. You can find him at his website, victorhanson.com is the URL, and the name of the website is The Blade of Perseus, and it's been completely revamped as of July 4th, and the apps have been completed. I think July 13th was the day that they were rolled out. So if you get Victor's Blade of Perseus on your cell phone, we do have new apps, so you want to delete your old app and download the new one. So, Victor, I wanted to look at it, since you and Jack talked a little bit about Fauci. I know that there's been a lot of news out about the origins of the virus, and it was clear very early on that at least there was a debate whether it was produced in a lab or not, and that Fauci stifled the debate, saying that it was produced in the lab. At least these diaries show that, and I know that the presses have been on that. He's also went after people like Scott Atlas and Jay Bhattacharya, which you and Scott talked about extensively. I was more curious and interested in this personal fame and his love of the celebrities and the general narcissism, because I think people are going to be stunned by what he had to say. So I'm going to read, and humor me a little bit here because it's a little bit long. He says in his diary, "The situation with my national and international fame is explosive and really unimaginable. It is not hyperbole to say that today I am the most famous and talked about person in the country and one of the most recognizable people in the world. Countless profiles on me in multiple media. I cannot even read all the things that are written about me since I'm so busy. Seriously, POTUS seems to be enamored of me even though I'm taking the spotlight away from him. We are developing a very unique and interesting relationship. The entire Secret Service Corps is coming over to me and chatting. They let me into the first gate without even checking ID. Everyone is worried about my health and welfare, probably because it's all over the place that I am almost 80 years old." And I'm reading that like a little kid because that 80-year-old sounds like a little kid here, Victor. So
He's an academic. of sorts. I mean, he left medical school and he wasn't really a practicing doctor. He went right into the bureaucracy and he worked his way up. And then he turned what was somewhat an obscure agency at the time, the Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, because, I mean, we do have the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and we have the FDA, and we have the National Institute of Health. But somehow, because he was there 40 years, he built an industry, and he got all of this power, but he had all this power within kind of a closet community. So when he got out, he got a little bit of fame during the AIDS crisis when he was in his 40s, and that was a narcotic. That addicted him to it. So then when the influenza came out in 2013, he had in those diaries, there's mention that he feels shorted, that he doesn't get enough airtime. So this was his big bonanza. And the problem he has is not just that he was wrong. I mean, he said masks have no utility, but you can then later, you have to wear a mask. And then 2 is better. And then he said, if you get the double sequence, Moderna, Pfizer, you will not be infectious and you will not be infected. It's that simple. It's that clear. And then 4 months later, after his vaccination, he not only got infected, but he hid that he had a pulmonary infarction. And so he had an embolism, basically. And that was a recognized side effect in some elderly patients that had the vaccination. But the biggest problem he's having is he went to Congress and he went into the public domain. He said things. So you mentioned he went after Jay Bhattacharya, and he went after Martin Kuhlendorf, and he went after Scott and Gupta, the doctor from Oxford, and he went after Scott Atlas. So why did he go after them? He went after them because he called them the Three Stooges, and then he called Atlas. He actually called up the woman, Alicia Griffith, that's working in The View. He called her up, or she called him up. It's unclear who called first, to fire Scott Atlas. She was working for the Trump administration. So they hated Scott Atlas because he was not impressed by Fauci or Deborah Birx. And so he kept bringing in, I've known Scott for 20 years. He just kept bringing in data and said, here's a study. If you shut down the schools, you will lose years of education at this key moment. If you put people and stuff them into houses and apartments, expect higher suicide, familial abuse, substance abuse. If you do this, expect alcoholism. If you do this, expect when you let them out, they're going to go crazy. And he went on, and you will destroy livelihoods. You will destroy small businesses. You'll bankrupt the country. And people will not go to the doctor to get PSA tests, breast exams, you name it, and the cancer and death rate will go up. And then he said, most radically, go ahead and get the vaccinations. We think that might have some utility, but it doesn't stop the virus. They got very angry at that. And then who's they? Birx, and Fauci and Francis Collins. And then in addition to that, Atlas, Bhattacharya and Kuhlendorf and Gupta were also saying that when you let people out, they're going to go crazy. And that's what happened with George Floyd. That 4 months, everybody was cooped up. And he said it's unenforceable anyway. And he was proven to be a Nostradamus. And Fauci was pictured at a baseball game with his mask down, and he said you had to wear it everywhere. And then we had, of course, Pelosi at her hairdresser, and Gavin down with athletes in L.A., and the French Laundry with lobbyists. And we had Fauci himself admitting that he was going to dinner festivities at Jake Tapper's house. This is a time when people could not go to Christmas. They could not go to Thanksgiving. They could not. That was against the law. And so he says all of these things in the public domain, and he said them under oath. And then we realize that all the time he was communicating with the opposite narrative. So he said, He says to France, he goes into panic mode when he hears about the Wuhan virus because he knows he had a hand in Wuhan. So then he gets experts together, 12. 10 of them tell him the sequence is impossible in nature. It didn't jump from a dead pangolin in a wet market. It didn't go from a bat 100 miles away. There's no evidence of animal to person transmission. It came from that lab. And then he admitted that that was the consensus. And then he went out in the public sphere and said just the opposite. And why did he say just the opposite? He said just the opposite because he had a hand in greenlighting gain of function research in China by allowing and encouraging U.S. scientists to communicate with Chinese researchers, to go over to China, to send critical instrumentation and know-how to China, and to give money through Peter Daszak, his Echo Health buddy. So he was saying one thing and doing the other. And what he was doing was illegal. It was barred in the United States. So the question now is, his reputation is ruined. He was also two things that people didn't like. He was a pathological narcissist. All he did is talk. People were dying at the rate of 9,000 a day some days, and he's in there writing about whether he has a bobblehead toy and how neat it is, and he's going to be on all the network news. He's the most famous person in the world. He thinks he's bragging that he is edging Scott out. He meets with Scott Atlas, and he says to him, "You're probably right about the schools. There's no evidence that you can stop the spread by shutting, and you're right that the damage outweighs the benefits." And then he also says, yeah, you never really said, as was quoted, let it rip, herd immunity. And then he goes out and says just the opposite and trashes Scott Atlas. And so then he had Trump's ear because Trump thought he was the most popular man in America and all the media loved him. So if he treated him well, and then Fauci basically took over all of COVID policy. This little bureaucrat from one obscure agency suddenly was running the United States with Deborah Birx, who nobody ever heard of. And people who had long careers in public health policy, like Scott Atlas and Jay Sharia, they were demonized. They say, well, Scott's a radiologist. He's not. Well, no, he's been studying and writing hundreds of articles on public health policy. He wrote the definitive book on the MRI and the brain. It's a huge, God, it weighs 10 pounds. And then Jay, they said, well, he didn't get his medical license. Well, he has a PhD and a MD degree. So they were desperate because they knew they were wrong. They were mean and spiteful. And he used one of the methodologies that come across in this vast trove is that he had his hands on billions of dollars of grants to academic institutions. Everybody knew him. So his fame was to go to conferences. There's Anthony Fauci. I just saw him walk by. This is the annual meeting of thoracic surgery. This is the annual meeting of virology. There he is. And I have a grant up to him. I have a grant for $7 million for my lab at Stanford, Duke, Vanderbilt, whatever. I'm going to go talk to him. Hi, Dr. Fauci. You are so brilliant on TV. Well, yes, I am. Well, and that's how he well, everybody was scared. So if you said, Dr. Fauci, I just want to tell you that you were wrong about the Wuhan lab. It's demonstrably untrue that it came from. Then he would go back and call. They knew he would go back and call. Who's that blank that confronted me? I don't want to give him a grant. So he was using our money to punish and reward people based on their fealty to him. And that's all going to come out. And the question is, will he say things that are demonstrably untrue or contradict things he said in the past on Wednesday when he's under oath? Because that blanket pardon is for everything up until the pardon. It's not a future pardon that if anything he does, And I have a feeling that he will do a James Comey. 245 times before the House Oversight Committee, James Comey, I don't know. I can't remember. That was not in my purview. He just flat out lied. Or he will say, I'm going to take the Fifth Amendment. Yeah. He's 85. What are they going to do to him? By the time they indict him, it would take years. But he's suffering now. And then the worst thing, he was conniving to get all these awards. He knew all the people in the different award committee. He's angling to get $1 million award from Israel. He's angry that the ethics people think that maybe he's using his platform as public trust to leverage it for money. So he has to get permission. And he's got all these awards. He's made millions of dollars. His wife had a high salary. They just raked it in. He comes across as really grasping and greedy and narcissistic and self-centered, and it doesn't, in his diary, he doesn't have any main discussions about the issues or the moral problems or anything. He comes off as heartless. When he said, "I remain the science," he discredited science.
You know that you say he's heartless. I found this one part in there that was very different from anything anybody's talking about. He says this: "We went in and presented to the POTUS, and he asked good questions, many of them to me. He agreed and was clearly concerned more about the health of the American people than he was about the economy, which he said would recover." That was a very nice thing to say about Donald Trump, and it's true about Donald Trump. He is, just like in the Iran war, he's more concerned about
How about the Ukraine war? He's the only person that said, "This is a bloodbath. We got to stop it."
yeah,
And
so
he is that way. And Fauci thought finally that he had seduced, in that rhetorical fashion, Trump, and he had him around his little finger. And then he says that basically Trump called him in and said, "You destroyed my president." He did. And that's another thing that comes out. Everybody should remember that he was a hardcore Democratic partisan. They loved him. This was an election year. And so they were and they understood that Joe Biden had outsourced his campaign to the media. So the media took over, and their narrative all of 2020 up until November was Donald Trump killed all these people. And there were no vaccinations. Joe Biden said there were no vaccinations until he took office in January of 2021. There had been 17 million people under Trump vaccinated. But they were doing everything. They were getting Pfizer to say, "Oh, we were going to announce that the Pfizer vaccination is ready and it works in October, but now that we think about it, let's just wait to be sure after the election," so Trump couldn't take credit for it. So it was he was part of that effort, and he was a rank partisan. And now he doesn't believe in this ancient concept we've talked about before, but every society has what comes around goes around, or karma, or the Greeks' idea of hubris earns nemesis. But there's something cosmic about these people, in the sense that Mark Milley, he was a Mark Milley. Mark Milley talked about his Princeton degree, and he got up in front of Congress and blustered about Professor Kendi. He attacked Trump, and he gave that interview with the biographer and bragged that he had called up his Chinese counterpart and said Trump was crazy, basically, and had usurped the chain of command. He had violated Article 88 of the Uniform Code. And now look at him. He's a joke. Look at Comey, 8647. He's a joke. He's completely discredited himself. Look at Bolton. Bolton thought he could type his little diary on email every day, and then he would compile the diary entries. This is what Fauci was doing. Exactly. He was doing what Bolton did. He was trying to write his book on government time and email it to himself. And then Bolton did it, and then he released it right during the campaign. He made millions of dollars. And now where is he? Karma hit him. Nemesis hit him. He's completely disgraced. And all Mark Milley had to do was say, "I would have never been chairman of the Joint Chiefs if it wasn't for Donald Trump. Never would. And he appointed me, and I'm going to be loyal to him, and it's not my job to be a political commentator." All John Bolton would have to say was, "I would have never been confirmed because the Democrats hated my guts, and I only had a recess appointment under George Bush, and Donald Trump gave me the National Security Advisor post, and I got to be loyal about that." He couldn't do that. From the moment he got there, he tried to undermine him. Same thing with all of these people. All Fauci had to do was just be politically neutral. He had some really mean things to say about class. He comes off as a elitist. He said that the worst thing I thought was, it wasn't the worst thing, but it was the most egregious. He said when he had to endure Rand Paul's cross-examination. It was like a dry cleaner talking to Albert Einstein. So he thinks he's Einstein, the greatest scientist of the 20th and 21st centuries. And he thinks that Rand Paul from Tennessee, Southern accent, is just a dry cleaner person. And then he said about Laura Ingraham, they were talking about Dartmouth. And Laura was one of the first, actually, to cross-examine him when he was coming on Fox for a limited time. And she was great. And he said, Poor Ingram. I can't believe she went to Dartmouth. Somebody wrote that. In other words, that either meant she was from the wrong side of the tracks or something and didn't belong at Dartmouth, or she was pathetic. I don't know what it was. But he's insulted so many people in that diary on the right, and he's canonized. The left owns him now. He's like an albatross. Jake Tapper, all those people, Joe Scarborough, it's Don Lemon, all those people. They own him now. They praise him to the skies. The View, all that. And people forget, if you go back to the election, it was Dr. Fauci is scientific and empirical and inductive, and that's the way Joe Biden will be running. It won't be this slash and burn, drink chlorine and ivermectin and nonsense of these conspiracy theories. So Fauci and Biden, that's what he wanted to pack himself at. He had already been in contact with the Biden campaign.
Yeah. You mentioned that. I was going to go on, but there's another quote here. Everybody knows D.C. is a city of gutter snipes. And he says this about watching your back. He goes, I am pretty safe. I believe since the public adulation of me has been amazing, with every young intern as well as seasoned veteran in the White House coming over to me, congratulating me and thanking me for my work, and even asking for selfies. What a naive Albert Einstein, if that were.
What did he do, though? What did he do? I can't figure it out. He did a couple of things. He covered up from the American people that the virus, almost 99% surety, originated at this Wuhan lab. He was wrong about the masks. They had utility for healthcare workers and people in close proximity with each other, but for the general public, they were making people wear masks outdoors. I went to Home Depot and there was a line to get in, and you could only have one person every 10 minutes go in. And then they had one of the people said that you had to wear a mask outside as you were waiting. And he did cover up a lot of the stuff. He had the policy about closing down the school was a disaster. Closing down the economy was a disaster. He was wrong about the efficacy of the vaccination. It wore off very quickly. He got himself a side effect of it and lied about it. I can't see what he did that was of any value. We had one of the worst records of industrial nations about deaths because of this. And if he had just taken the resources and just said, K through 12, the data shows that young people are not prone to serious COVID illnesses or side effects. They can get the vaccination, but it's not required of them, and they will go to school normally. And then he said, we're going to fixate on the people 55 and above. They can die from this, and use all our resources on them. It would have been a different country.
Absolutely. Well, Victor, we're going to go to you and a discussion of Fauci's testimony, which is going to be recorded tomorrow after I thank our sponsor, My Patriot Supply. Just a few years ago, if you told someone you were stocking up on emergency food, they would have called you a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. Not anymore. We've all seen supply chain chaos, devastating natural disasters, inflation, wars, civil unrest, and preparedness has gone mainstream. That's why we're so excited to partner with My Patriot Supply, America's original Patriot preparedness company. Right now, they're celebrating America's 250th birthday with one of the best deals they've ever offered, $250 off their best-selling 6-month emergency food supply, available now at preparewithvdh.com. That's preparewithvdh.com. This is the exact same survival brand trusted by over 3 million American families. Why? Because they deliver 2,000 calories a day. Their food lasts up to 25 years without refrigeration, and it contains no GMOs or artificial colors or flavors. And you can count on it to keep your family fed no matter what happens. Even at full price, it's still the best decision you'll make for your family. With this $250 discount, it's a no-brainer. Go to preparewithvdh.com. That's preparewithvdh.com. And we'd like to thank My Patriot Supply for sponsoring the Victor Davis Hanson Show.
So I watched Anthony Fauci before Congress. He did a funny thing. He gave a statement blasting his critics, and then he gave them no chance to reply.
Given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote.
In other words, while he was under oath and subpoena, he followed the subpoena. He gave his opening statement. But then he said this is going to be a one-way hearing because every single question, and I stopped watching at 90 invocations of the Fifth Amendment, he pled the Fifth Amendment.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, well, silence is admission.
Think of the precedent that establishes. Congress wants to find out, wants to investigate, subpoena somebody. If you don't go, you're going to go to jail if you're Steve Bannon or Peter Navarro. But if you're Anthony Fauci, as in the case of left-wing Lois Linner, you just blast everybody and then you shut up and hide behind the Fifth Amendment and make a mockery while the Democratic senators walk out and try to ruin the entire inquiry. But what was the inquiry about? Remember, we talked about that. 1,100 pages that, in his arrogance, he kept a diary. And in the diary, he admitted to things, or he confessed things, that were absolutely contrary to his public policies and his positions on everything from masks to shutdowns, to quarantines, to vaccinations, to the role of Scott Atlas in the White House, to Donald Trump, to the origins of the Wuhan virus itself. So we don't know who to believe. Do we believe when he was confiding to the diary? Or do we believe when he was talking to the public? We have no idea. In other words, he did blow up his career, not just by being arrogant and using that fiefdom to not only enrich himself. We got $1 million grant while he was the director of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases.
Your net worth now is north of $12 million. You got over $1 million in cash awards during COVID, during a 12-month, 24-month span during COVID. $1 million you knocked down in cash money using federal resources. Now you're worth more than $12 million. You've got a pension that in its first year paid out north of $400,000 a year.
But also to speak, to be a public persona, to be flattered by Hollywood celebrities. About 10-20% of his corpus of diary entries are all about his celebrity and how famous and wonderful and how many people want to enrich him. So now he's imploded. Everybody should, I guess, again, think about the Greek or the Aeschylean idea of hubris, that is, overweening arrogance leads to complete recklessness, ate, and the gods intervene, and the goddess Nemesis provides divine retribution. Part of me felt sorry for Anthony Fauci. He's 85 years old. He's been in government years. Some of his years were not too bad, but the way that he was so arrogant and the lives that he affected and the people who lost businesses and the people who miss cancer screenings and keep surgical procedures because of the nationwide lockdown and the destruction of the economy and the psychological damage that ensued, and people who trusted him and when he said that this experimental vaccination was both safe and it would prevent infectiousness and being infected, and all of that was untrue. And so here this poor old man was up there trying to plead the Fifth Amendment, and he said, basically, I have nothing to apologize. You are unfair, and I resent this, and I'm done. I'm not going to answer one question. You have no right to cross-examine me on anything in my diary, anything I've said. So it was really the complete career and personal destruction of Anthony Fauci.
Welcome back, and thanks for giving Victor time to talk about Fauci's testimony. Now let's turn to Mamdani. He's been doing some very interesting but expected, I suppose, things in New York City. He has called out people, and he says they need to get into the streets to protest, is what I'm understanding from that. And then, more importantly, he's published a list of names and addresses of people who have second residence and will be subject to the pied-à-terre tax, is what they're calling.
I don't think people understand him. He would rather be a socialist mayor over rubble than a successful mayor of New York. What drives him is not even social equality. It's anger, envy, and hatred of people who have more money than he does. That's a common symptom of the upper middle class, right? So he's a walking hypocrisy. He's an only child of a mother who came over here from Uganda as the privileged family of a 1%, 60, 70,000 people owned 65% of the GDP. He had all of those perks. He comes over here. He was a prolonged adolescent. He had no job. He was a rapper. He was an activist. And finally, he won one term in the New York Assembly. And then he became hard socialist. And that's everything he says is vindictive and mean. I'm surprised that when you have his own staff meeting stealthily with the Iranian delegation that was from a government that just killed 40 to 50,000, that he wouldn't say, when the Iranians come, let's demonstrate against them. But he wouldn't, because they're A, Muslim, and B, he thinks they're left-wing. Or when the Russians come, he would because of the Ukraine atrocities and the way they treat prisoners, or the Chinese. So everybody should realize he hates Jews and he hates Israel, and that consumes him. And that's why he says we're going to go after, and he hates white people. And he has this fake socialist smile that he's a really nice guy, but he's a psychopath. And when somebody yells Allah Akbar and sounds, he says he's just mentally disturbed. You're an Islamophobe if you think that had anything with Allah Akbar. And when they attack a Jewish daycare center, or when you have a map of the little thing, he, in Orwellian fashion, erases the Jewish presence in New York. He's a bad person. Then he goes right up to the mirror, to the camera of Ken Griffiths, and takes a picture and says, I'm going to come after you. And he left. Ken Griffith left with his billions. And then he says to people, he sends them an email, you're going to get something in the mail, you're going to lie, to all the people who he thinks are insects preying, capitalist insects preying on people. And there was thousands of them that were working class people, and maybe they inherited their dad's house and then they built another one and they're renting it out or something. And he's going after them.
Yeah. So what do you think the point of this was? Because he had already sent out letters to their mailboxes that they were going to owe this tax. So it's not an informational thing. He just basically doxed these people.
Yeah, he's, and we're talking about it. So when did anybody ever talk about the mayor? Did we ever talk in our podcast about Bill de Blasio? No. Michael Bloomberg once in a while. But no. That's what he wants. He's a world publicity Fauci-like narcissist. And he's got a lot of money, so he didn't care if he's going to be, if he's one term, he's angling for something like the vice presidential nomination. That's what he's angling for. And he thinks that he can smile and sweet talk, but he's got a mean streak in him. Everybody should remember that. He's a mean person. That's why he does stupid things like, you're going to get an email, I'm going to dox you, I'm going to go after whiter neighborhoods. Oh, you're mad that he yelled Allah Akbar and stabbed some people? Can't hear you. That kind of attitude. All of his plans are, he's not going to open a bunch of food markets. The only thing he's got going for him is he's going to pay the rent. He's going to give them the land so that they can compete. They're inefficient, but maybe they'll have an edge over a private supermarket that has to pay, taxes and stuff. So everything he does is going to help ruin New York, and they voted for him. But it was only 11% of the resident voting population.
Can I bring this up? Because we've heard a lot of commentary on how the socialists, the DSAs, are taking over the Democratic Party, or they're in a big conflict and they're this big presence. There was an article in a publication called Lyceum by Scott Rasmussen, and he made the argument that by the polls, because he's a polls expert, these socialists really don't make up more than 12%. He had 6% really support him, and another 6% say, well, it'd kind of be a good idea to get things from the socialists. And he says that's only 12%. So all of the media on how this is a very problematic thing in the Democratic Party and the socialists are threatening is probably should be taken less seriously than it is. Although he didn't say that
That's a good point. And as I said earlier, they have not won one statewide election. Mike Rogers in Michigan is running ahead of both Haley Stevens and El Sayed. Paxton is running ahead of Tallarico, and they will have more money even than Tallarico. And Susan Collins is running ahead in Maine. We'll see if they win one, because so far they're just an artifact of an urban enclave of downwardly mobile, white, highly educated people who are embittered that they can't buy and have a lifestyle comparable to a stockbroker or a doctor or lawyer, given their worthless gender studies or sociology or psychology degrees, environmental studies. So that's his constituency, but this is the qualifier. In between 1900 and 1917, the Bolsheviks, nobody wanted them. They were nutty. And the Mensheviks and the constitutionalists that wanted to overthrow the Tsar, they were the majority of the people. But that didn't stop the Bolsheviks. The majority of the Iranian people wanted the Shah out, and they wanted a Bani Sadr, goat's body, socialist, secular government. That's what they wanted, maybe even hard left. And Khomeini and the theocrats hijacked that because they were the true believers and they were willing to kill people and do what's necessary. And so Me Too started out as if any woman who had been in the workplace and a man had propositioned her as quid pro quo, that was a legitimate complaint against Harvey Weinstein, etc. It ended up going after Al Franken because he had a joke where he put his hand near a woman's breast and they destroyed her whole life. Or Garrison Keillor, made some passes or something. It was always, then it got framed as any time a man expressed any sexual interest, he was culpable, whether there was repartee or quid pro quo, and women never do that. Women never sleep with men on their own initiative and seduce them for a promotion. But women are human. And everybody does that at times. But it was so, and same thing with George Floyd is a angel. We have wings, we have a halo in the mural, we have the George Floyd. He did nothing wrong. And then if you said, no, he was trying to pass counterfeit. He was a prison convict. He staged a home invasion where his colleague put a knife to a woman's belly. He was on drugs. He resisted arrest. He had COVID and fentanyl. And they did a police-approved procedure of a neck. I've seen since then on YouTube 1,000 police, when the person's thrashing around and hitting them, they put their knee on their neck. And then the person they don't press it down. That problem was that Officer Chauvin he looked too cruel, the foot. But the point is, then that triggered, it was okay to bomb St. John's Church, precinct, federal courthouse, 14,000 arrests, and summer of law, all that crazy. So my point is this: if you let these extremists go and you say, well, they haven't won a state election, no, but they will pick up momentum and they will be a fad and a cult. And you've got to be careful because they can come to power with very little public support if they know how to operate, and they do. And I think the first stage is where they were democratic socialists. Now they don't talk about being Democrat. They just say they're socialists. If you go on their website, they love Marx. They talk about Cuba, China, Venezuela. They quote Karl Marx. They don't say they're communists yet, because communism differs from socialism in the sense that there are no elections and there's no private property. But if you ask these socialists, and you say Mamdani says he's going to confiscate private property if he finds they're not good rental landlords, or if you say he's going to take your second home away by taxing you to death, or you say we're going to have no ID, mail-in balloting, open borders, amnesty you're destroying election integrity, and you're going to go down the Daniel Noriega way of the elections don't mean anything. So they're getting close, and I think if they have some more local successes, they won't object to being called communists. Shannon Bream had that head of the Democratic Socialists. I admire that woman because Shannon Bream said, here's your manifesto. Do you want to have open borders? Yes. Do you want to have amnesty for illegal aliens? Yes. Do you want to defund the police? Absolutely. Do you want to defund the Pentagon? Yes. Do you want to open? Yeah, that was what they admitted to. That's a communist manifesto.
Yeah.
Get rid of the prisons.
Yeah. Yeah, get rid of the prisons, get rid of ICE.
I tell you that if she goes into south side of Chicago, she'll have a bodyguard.
That's true. Okay, so let's continue with this crazy left wing. El Said has made the suggestion that he would like to put a head on a spike, and that the first one he would go after is Fetterman. So it's sounding a lot like the French Revolution to me.
He's a basket case. He claims he's a doctor. He had never had a medical license. He was the head medical officer for Detroit. He says he's a man of the people. He and his wife had a combined income of over $600,000. His father-in-law had some connection with donating to the Muslim Brotherhood. One of his top aides ran a kind of a Alzheimer pill scan. Just everything about him is creepy. And right as I'm speaking today, Haley Stevens, who has her own problems, she comes across as that she's
the other Democratic candidate.
Yes, in Michigan. Yeah. She comes across as she has some kind of fit that she goes, it's almost like she's in a frenzy. And she's very awkward. But I give her credit, she didn't renounce her support for Israel. She's outraised him about 6-1. He's saying the Jews have taken over, I think he will lose. And I think Mike Rogers can beat her. She's an incumbent representative. And I think Tallarico can be beaten, and I think Susan Collins will win, and that will show you that they don't have, but that won't stop them. They will still try to take over the institutions, burrow their way in, etc. But I would love to see a AOC Mamdani ticket in 2028. I think they would have the largest loss in history. It would be like McGovern. I had a good friend, and he was the TA, and I was in his class, and he said, kind of like Pauline Kael. She never knew anybody that voted for Nixon. She said she never did. He had the second biggest landslide in history in 72. But this guy said to me, if everybody at UC Santa Cruz, who's talking to a student, I was a student, will go home and tell your parents to vote for McGovern, he can win because there's 1 million of us students nationwide, 2 or 3 million. And I said, well, could I ask a question? So my parents, they're in their early 40s and I'm just turned 18. Do you think they're going to listen to me? And they're supporting me. Why would they listen to me? And he said, well, and that's how they thought. They didn't know one person. I remember the precinct vote in 1972 at the UC Santa Cruz zip code or polling code. It was something like 99.9 for McGovern. I can remember I took a class from a really good guy. He went to the Naval Academy. I remember, but he was a political science professor. Carl Lamb, kind of a famous, and I took one, and my academic advisor said, you should take that class. He's the only Republican in the entire faculty. In fact, he's the only conservative on the entire campus, student, faculty, anybody. It might be interesting. I said, okay. Then I took Bruce Larkin's class, and you know what we did? I took 2 political science. I thought thank God I wasn't a political science major, but he put the radio on from Radio Peking. And once every 3 or 4 weeks, Mao spoke. And then he would translate. He knew Chinese. And we had to sit there like, my fellow comrades, we will kill the running dog capitalists. Yeah, that's what he did. And he was an out-and-out communist. They
Which
all were.
was similar to the rest of the faculty.
Yes.
All right, just one last thing before we go. Maybe this is a short thing. Bernie says he doesn't regret supporting Platner when he did. I don't know if you have any.
That's a good communist socialist position to take. Any means necessary. You never apologize for your methodology. It's the aim. The aim is a socialist communist utopia. So Platner was for that. So he had, as Stalin said, break a few eggs to make an omelet. So who cares if he has he got a little rowdy he mussed up some girl's hair. He got a little rowdy with another one, play acting, locked her in the closet, got a little drunk and put a SS Totenkopf tattoo. Now, he may have bragged about it a little bit, and he kind of padded his resume a little bit. He says some kind of crazy things about Jews, but other than that, he's a good socialist. That's Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, that is Bernie Sanders.
I remember I used to go a lot to Vermont.
Yeah.
And speak. I spoke at Middlebury. I spoke at the University of Vermont. I spoke on this big agricultural retreat. And I spoke at Burlington, University of Vermont. And everybody said he was their mayor, and then he was their congressman for a while. And they said, oh, Bernie's crazy. We all vote for him. We don't take him seriously. He's kind of a nice guy. He's kind of like a homeless person. He lived in the forest, and he had no money, and his wife saw how crazy he was. That's how his reputation was. They loved him, but nobody took him seriously.
All right, Victor, let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about, or I wonder if you have any ideas on the Joe Biden. The tapes are coming out again for some reason by her. But one second, let's go to some messages, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Victor is on X. His handle is at VD Hanson, and on Facebook at Hanson's Morning Cup. So join him there if social media is your news outlet. So the tapes from Robert Herr's interview, but also tapes from his interactions with his ghostwriter. And that was the one I heard where he just talks matter-of-factly of, "Oh, yes, I found these classified files that I've had forever," but he just talks as though,
Some of
wow,
them
they're just
escaped. Remember,
downstairs.
those were under subpoena, and the ghostwriter destroyed evidence under subpoena. And he said, well, I did it so I could protect their integrity because they were being hacked. I stopped them from being hacked. But he had no security clearance, and Biden was just blabbing and handing him stuff that was classified. People got to remember that they all went after Trump, but Trump was the president of the United States. Had he taken the trouble, he could have written a little memo and said, these are declassified. He could do that. He didn't do it. He kind of touched them and said, I say that you're declassified, like you're a knight or something, knighted them. But Biden had no ability to do that as vice president. He had 4 locations, not one. Mar-a-Lago, if you drive by it, it's got a big guard tower. It's got a fence. He had nothing. That garage was a joke. And then he was sloppy, and he made about, $8 or $9 million off it, of his memoirs. So we just handed all this crap, and it was always... The reason I'm kind of going on, I wrote the Counter-Revolution, and I did not fully appreciate to the depths of the Democratic depravity. I really didn't. I didn't realize that he appointed Jack Smith as special counsel within hours or a few days after Trump announced his candidacy in November of 2022 to run. And then once there was a special prosecutor, then he thought, oh my gosh, I'm waging lawfare to destroy Donald Trump because he took classified documents. Somebody's going to start poking around. I've been doing that for 30 years. I know what I'll do. I'll have my lawyer call up the DOJ and say, I'm Dudley Do-Right's attorney, Joe Biden, and he suddenly realized that he may have inadvertently, for a year or two, 30 years, found some classified document. And unlike Donald Trump, we are going to comply. And then he made a big deal out of it. Then the lapdog media wrote and said, unlike Donald Trump, Joe Biden volunteered when he thought there might be a question. It's not even comparable, Victor. I was on a couple of interviews. So then he staged that. And then he thought, I'll have to get a special prosecutor after me. So they appointed, one for him to go through the motions. And of course, Robert Hur found that A, he was senile, and B, he broke the law and committed a felony by taking out classified documents and lying about it. And more importantly, kept them for 30 years. And they had him on tape that he couldn't even answer. So Robert Hur thought, I'm in a really big jam. All these left-wing people hate me. How can I get it? But he's guilty. So I got a good idea. I think what I'll do is no jury. I'll do the James Comey. Hillary's guilty, of course. She's destroyed her appurtenances. She's destroyed everything. She took class. But how am I going to get out of this? Because I want to keep my job and she's going to win. I know what I'll do. No jury would convict her. So he said, but of course, no one would ever convict a person on this, so there's no reason to indict her. So Robert Hur said the same thing. He said, he's guilty, but when you put him on the stand, he's a poor man, old man with a poor memory. And then Hur was so stupid is the left thought the left were going to call him, thank you, Bob. That was a great idea. You saved and you made Jack Smith more authentic, and now there's just one special problem. It's all over. And what an idiot. Instead, they called him up and said, you SOB, you said that he's senile. How dare you talk? Remember that hearing with Kamala Harris and Adam? They all trashed him. And then they basically subpoenaed the tapes, and they wouldn't turn him over. Now they've turned him over, and he's worse than you imagine.
Yeah, those tapes.
The tapes with Robert Hur and the tapes with that his speechwriter didn't destroy.
Yeah. You know, we have to thank for even the Fauci diaries, the HHS, I think, director, the Health and Human Services, he and his crew went down into, I think, several different servers to collate
Bobby
all of this
Kennedy did
stuff.
too.
Yeah.
Bobby Kennedy, HHS now, he did.
Yeah.
He did he was on television the other night. But you got to remember, he wrote a book about Fauci's lies. The book was about what a pathological liar Fauci was, and they deplatformed him from Instagram and everything, and they hated him. And now it's very ironic that I wrote this in the Counter-Revolution book, that one of the prerequisites to work for Trump so you would have unquestioned loyalty and be angry, was that you had to be a victim of Biden's overreach. So Kash Patel, the FBI, went after him. You remember that? Dan Bongino, they had gone after him. Then he appointed RFK. They had really gone after Orca. They had deplatformed him. And Pete Hegseth, they had gone after him in a way. So he went after people that really were angry that they had gone, and that would mean that they wouldn't flip or be traitors or whatever.
And these things were published by Rand Paul on his X account, right? And Rand Paul kind of had a little bit of a tiff with Fauci as well. But I want to ask you something more serious. Yeah, dry cleaner comment. But I want to ask you something serious then about that. There is a humorous side to it when people get into fighting with each other, I guess, to make it nice. But what do we benefit from that? I know that the founding fathers said one man's ambition will counter another man's ambition, and that's the process by which they'll ferret out evil in this world. Should we just stop there and say, it's just necessary, we understand that?
No, you count on transparency and you count on a watchdog media, but we don't have a watchdog media. It disappeared. We have NBC, ABC, CBS, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, Boston Globe, NPR, PBS, ABC, CBS, NBC, Columbia School of Journalism, that whole conglomerate. They're there as adjuncts to the Democratic left-wing project. And so think about it. What did they give us? They gave us the Steele dossier is authentic. Donald Trump is a Russian spy. No, you lied and tried to fix an election through that lie. They gave us Hunter Back laptop. I know it looks incriminating, but it was cooked up in Moscow. It's a product of Russian information services. No, that was a lie. Jussie Smollett, that was a modern lynching. Can you believe that two white males went in with red MAGA caps and bleach and a rope at 2 a.m, defied the laws of chemistry, threw the bleach out, and it didn't freeze just because they were so evil? And then they attacked him, but Jussie, being a heroic fellow and diminutive, fought off two big, ugly, mean white guys while holding his sandwich and his cell phone and beat them up. But they did put a noose around his neck. And that's proof that it happened. Now, there's a little matter that he wrote checks to the black guys who wore whiteface, basically. But, things happen. So and then the Wuhan lab, every big lie that hurt the country, they've been behind for political purposes. That was behind the 2 impeachments, everything. January 6th, remember what Kamala Harris said? Did you know, audience, what she said? She said that it was equivalent to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, she said, and 9/11. Think about that. 3,000 people incinerated 9/11, 2,400 bombed to death at Pearl Harbor, and January 6th, where only one person died at the hand violently of another. Maybe two, but they were both Trump supporters, but it was a 114-pound diminutive 14-year veteran, and she was basically shot unarmed for the crime of a misdemeanor going through a broken window. And then Officer Byrd was what? Canonized
Yeah.
as a victim
Yeah.
who had a disreputable record of misbehavior himself.
Okay, so maybe let's go to a break, Victor, and then come back. I have another question about these files and interviews and those things. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, Victor Davis Hanson, in his own words. So, last question on these Fauci files, Robert Hur tapes, and Joe Biden ghostwriter tapes. So somebody goes to read these things. And this might be too early to ask, but does a person learn something from that about their own conduct if they are to become? Or are they just, I mean, I hope it's just by bad example, but I'm not sure.
I
What-
do. I think our listeners do. It is beware of nemesis, beware of hubris. On your way up, you're going to go on your way down. So be nice to people. Take an effort. When you have good things going to you and people says, wow, that's great or something, take a deep breath and say, this is sic transit Gloria. Gloria is passing by. Remember the Roman triumphal procession where a slave would run to the dictator or the consul who was being praised by 1 million people in Rome and said, sic transit Gloria, sic transit Gloria. Don't let this go to your head. Think of all the great people that, I mean, it's very hard for people when you get adulation or fame or you want that to realize it's not important at all. You're not going to go to heaven for that. It's all based on how you treat people. And these people were not Milley and Bolton and Comey and McCabe and Clapper and Brennan and Fauci and Francis Collins. They were not humble people. They were arrogant. And they thought that their momentary or transitory success or their position of power or their degrees meant something. And they would be iconic forever. And then when they found out they weren't, James Comey was the most powerful law enforcement person in the United States. He was reduced to meandering on a beach and rearranging seashells. It said 86-47. He wanted to kill Trump, I guess. And then he wants to lie about it and says, well, it's happened. Yeah, James, I've been on some beaches lately and I saw a lot of 86, 46, 42. No, come on. So that's the message. And the other message is you have to have a free press. Why didn't we know about this? Because Joe Scarborough would get on his show and say, he's an American legend. And Don Lemon said, he's not like anybody else. And he created this cult of personality. And they used that because they were in the tank for Obama and Biden and Hillary Clinton. And they thought he was useful. And he knew what he was doing. He was a rank partisan. And he was leaking about Donald Trump. And that's what he did. And he got what he deserved. It's tragic because now he's an old 85-year-old man, and you've got to think about your mortality and your reputation, which he's so obsessed over. And there is a God, and he does see things. There's a Christian God, and even the ancients that were pre-Christian knew that the ophthalmos to Xenos, the eye of Zeus, as Hesiod said, sees everything. And they see everything, every little speck. And you think the idea you're just going to treat people terribly and brag on yourself and brag and connive for this award. There is some tolerance for that, but not to the degree of that hubris that he displayed. So he got what was coming to him. It's tragic because all he had to do was just say, when they started praising him, all he had to say, I have a team. Here's a CD, and I have critics, and I want to incorporate and learn from them, because this is the lives of millions of Americans, no one man. But instead he said, I remain the science. He discredited science. Nobody's going to believe a lot of, they're going to say, if I say we have to be scientific people, we have to be inductive, we're not deductive, superstitious people prone to conspiracy theories. Somebody out there's going to say, Victor, Victor, Victor. So who had the conspiracy theory about the meat market and the pangolin? Victor, Victor, Victor. Who was the one that told us that the Steele dossier proved that Donald Trump was Putin's collaborator to throw an election? Victor, Victor, Victor. Who told us that Joe Biden was fit as a fiddle and perfectly okay and robust? And I think it was Joe Scarborough. I've never seen a more robust Biden. And Victor, Victor, Victor. Who told us that Hunter's laptop was cooked up in Moscow? So when you do that, you just destroy credibility, and that's what Fauci helped to do. He did more than anybody, along with James Comey, I think, to destroy credibility and discredit himself and his profession.
Yeah.
I feel bad about it because I saw this happen firsthand because I was very close to Scott. He was probably one of my best friends at the Hoover Institution, and I saw them systematically leak about him and go to Trump and whisper in Trump's ear that Scott was too erratic or all of these terrible things. And yet I knew that he was right. And that you could, and then when you see these people with PhDs and they act as if they're humane intellectuals and you're on the Stanford campus and he walks by and they go like this, turn their head against him. Why? Because Fauci planted these lies that Scott Atlas just said, let it rip. He wants everybody to get sick and die. That's what he wants.
Well, Victor, since you are talking about the media and its irresponsibility in our democracy, I have two sports stories here. One is Caitlin Clark has finally responded to all of the foray around her being assaulted by the other basketball player on the basketball court. And she came in an interview with Malika Andrews. She said, and very strongly, she said, it's you guys, the media, that are distorting what's going on in everywhere, not just that one incident. And you're ginning up a bunch of hostilities that are not true to the reality of our basketball, the women's NBA.
I think what she was trying to say is, yes, I am a minority as a white woman heterosexual, but I have, and most of the league, 60% are black lesbian. How that happened, I don't know. I don't think you could say that most of the NBA are black homosexuals. They're not. But that be it as it may, somebody, I think I mentioned that to somebody, said, Victor, this is hyper-masculinity, but if there was a national organization for fashion, most of the men would be gay. You know what I mean? And many of the women would be straight. So he shot me down on that one. But what I'm getting at is she's in an untenable position, because if she tells the truth and says, I came into this league and I got all this attention because, white girls from Iowa don't get everything handed on their plate. She got all that attention because she was probably the best female basketball player in a generation. And then she came into this club, which nobody wanted to talk about, was mostly black and lesbian. And she was antithetical as white and heterosexual. And then she was an agile player. She wasn't a muscle woman. But these players, many of them were 6'2" and 200 pounds in muscle. So they thought they were just going to rough her up. And that might have been usual with all rookies, but they took it to the next level that had a racial or sexual component to it. And the more that they did it, the more the media was confused, because the media is left-wing.
Looking the other way is how I would
Yes, the media's thing, well, not just that. The media's idea was that she represents racism because there are 7,000 to 10,000 more fans that are coming out, but they wouldn't come out for black lesbian players. They only came out for a white. Okay, do you think that Stephanie, what's her name? Her partner, that's pointed,
Oh, yeah. Was it
Robinson?
Cooper?
It's not Robin. Thompson? I can't remember.
I thought it was Cooper.
But anyway, do you think they would have come? She's she's beautiful and she's blonde and she's charismatic, but she doesn't have the presence that Caitlin Clark. So they're not coming out for her. So the media was lying. They're coming out for her because she is the best player they've ever seen, and she shoots anywhere from the court. And there may be people who like the idea that they want diversity. If this was a black woman and an all-white thing, if suddenly there was a black male hockey player and he was the only great hockey player in the NHL, of course black people would be proud of that and they would go out and see it. But it doesn't work the other way. So there were some white people that were proud that she broke into a black-dominated lesbian sport. But whatever that was, all the black players had to do was, we're going to treat her like anybody else. And secretly, we know what's in our interest. These people are coming out and they're paying, and the league is getting rich, and we're no longer orphaned of the NBA. We're starting to get our own charter flights to go. We get nicer hotels. We get bigger raises because of her. And then that was a little good angel on their shoulder. The little devil angel said, yeah, but she's racist, so you got to knock her a few times, and she won't do anything, and the media will cover, and anytime she does anything, they'll say it's racist. And they did. So this crazy USA Today columnist basically said that if she grimaces or she overplays an injury, and by the way, all basketball players do that. They go take a layup and you feel like they're in the ER to get a foul called. But she doesn't do any more than anybody else. But the difference is she gets hit more than anybody else. But basically, she said that she was encouraging racism and like Emmett Till lynching. That woman is insane to say that. And she's a racist herself. So what I'm getting at is that this whole Caitlin Clark episode was the proverbial beautiful granite rock of a women's basketball, and then they turned it over. And nobody knew what the Women's National Basketball Association was about. Nobody watched it. And then they turned it over. And they said to themselves, my gosh, this is a mostly black, gay group of women, and they're very intolerant, and can be violent, and they're mean. In the case of Caitlin Clark, and the media hid this, and when they are mean and try to injure her permanently, the media calls her the racist. So that's what she's talking about, the media. She's in a no-win situation because the only way that the people in the NBA are going to like her, and the only way she can say she's not a racist, is just to have about 2 legs broken and break her neck. And then they're going to say, poor thing, now she can't play anymore, and that's that. That's what they want to do to her. The other thing is, very, very quickly, is that we have DEI fatigue. People are starting to see that DEI is not diversity, equity, inclusion. It is systematic racism, judging people by the color of your skin and incurring hatred against them to get personal advantages or career advancement on the basis of your color or your sexual orientation or your gender. And it's not compatible with a democratic society. If you think it is, go look and see how India, Brazil, or Indonesia are doing. Not too well. But everybody should just see what that is. And we can see it with the overtly, these candidates that come, especially the second generation, first generation immigrant. What do they all have? What does Mamdani and Ilhan Omar and Quiroz and Chevrolet say? They've all said things about stereotyping white people. You know what I mean? White people. We're going to go after whiter, nicer neighborhoods. white supremacists are the greatest danger in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that DEI, I know that a lot of conservatives say, no, Victor, DEI, it's just temporarily, they're going to come back. I don't know. I think people have had it with it. Everybody's had it with it because they know where it leads to. It leads to Armageddon. You can't continue it. And I think it really helped about Obama. He started it, and he's turned into kind of a buffoon. He really has. He's got these 4 big mansions in Chicago and Washington and Martha's Vineyard in Hawaii. He's a materialist, and then he talks about curbing your appetites and being satisfied with just enough to get by. And he's got Michelle, who's still got a chip on her shoulder because she thinks that people don't think that she's stunningly beautiful. And they're just dysfunctional, and they're obsessed with race, and that's all they talk about.
Yeah, and the case in point was the other athletic story. Ryan Clark was a Black commentator for ESPN, and he was always turning everything to race, whether it was, and I think the last thing he did was to criticize the entire Louisiana. I'm not sure exactly what town, but Louisiana law. Yeah, the police department, because they had arrested a Black guy that had, in fact,
wrong the way in the opposite lane, and then he gave a little performance art, and then he also, the Louisiana State University system wanted to have a statue of Charlie Kirk after his murder, and he went off. But what really cooked him was Anthony Fauci hubris. He got on, and he said in an interview, I was worried about being laid off because nobody's watching it anymore because it's racist. And they don't want, sports, but these people try to go every minutia, every little angle and put race into it and politics. So they're sick of it. But he said, I went in and the guys told me, that you're the best halftime commentator. You're the best sideline commentator. You're the best analyst. And then I walked away and I was kind of like, I am. And then he was so arrogant and hubristic. And I thought to myself, when I saw that, because I didn't know really much about him, I thought, oh, you're King Pentheus in the Bacchae. Oh, you're Oedipus at the Oedipus Rex. You know what's coming? Because, you're Hippolytus. Oh, the very sight of sex repels me. Do you know where you're going to? And sure enough, then they called him in and said, right in the middle of his show, and said, see you, wouldn't want to be you. And then he starts going. And the tough, Black, macho, male athlete who has spouted racial hatred for, I don't know, and got away with it and said he was irreplaceable. I can't believe what happened to me. This is so unfair. What am I going to do? And that's what he was.
Literally to our audience. He, in fact, was crying on a podcast.
Just like Don Lemon. And why wouldn't they think that, Don Lemon? Why wouldn't they think that when they were promoted basically on the basis of race and nobody ever said to them, I can't hire you because everything that comes out of your mouth is racial hatred. And if you were white, you would be fired in 2 seconds. And they thought they had a dignity. They were insured. Nobody could touch them. And Don Lemon's a great example of a guy who was a CNN anchor, and he's now reduced to running along the subway and putting his phone and doing an interview as somebody passes by, or doing a stunt by going in with a bunch of thugs into a church. He's just destroyed himself.
Well, Victor, we're towards the end of our show with a few more minutes, and I have some comments from various places where your podcast is seen. And these are 2 sides of views of Israel. So stick with me. The first one is definitely anti-Israel. Israel is a terrorist state. This is Ryan Reed, and he says, great article today, VDH, about the mendacious Mamdani. Mr. Hanson, you are obviously an accomplished thinker and writer, so I must ask, with the blind obedience, why the blind
That was a
obedience?
tip-off adjective.
I know
I haven't heard
exactly.
it. Blind.
Why the blind
I have
obedience
bad
to
eyesight, but I'm
Israel?
not blind.
I'm told the boomers simply refuse to question anything that they have been taught since the war ended. Clearly, there is a shift in attitudes taking place in this nation. I don't believe anything without evidence. I've actually seen too much. Bibi is a war criminal and Israel is a terrorist state.
I love when he says evidence I've seen, and not one data point, not one example, just a searching. Why is he a war criminal? Why is he a war criminal? Tell me why. And that means tell me what you would do when they slaughtered and raped and mutilated and beheaded 1,200 of your own people, and you were the president of a nation, the prime minister with the responsibility to keep them safe. And then you gave them 3 weeks to turn over the perpetrators and give back the hostages, and they killed more people. So what would you do? No, he can't give
Exactly.
you any.
No. So this is the other side of the coin, and this is from Real Ken Jackson. Why do so many in the legacy media give the psychotic Palestinians, he puts quotes around Palestinian, a pass on the atrocities they commit against Jews, but wrongly accuse Israel of genocide against the savage psychotics in Gaza? So there you
What's
go.
weird about that is they don't use the word genocide when the Iranian government, which, by the way, just hanged a few other people today, I think. They don't give. Trump said 52,000, but let's just say it was 45,000 they shot and executed. Nobody said it genocide. Even the inflated Hamas figure was not 50,000. So that really gave the game away. They don't care about the dead or the dead. All they care about is what method can I demonize the Israelis and the Jews? And I'm going to apply a standard to them that I certainly don't apply to Iran, and I don't apply on ethnic cleansing to Azerbaijan, who just did it to the Armenians. I don't do it to the Turks, who ethnically cleanse Cypriots. I don't do it to Mamdani, who was a settler colonial family. I call the Israelis, you don't belong in the Middle East. Remember, what's her name? Thomas was her name. She was the head of the White House press corps. She was Lebanese, I think. And she said, why don't you Jews go back to Poland where you belong? And my point is, the Jews have a 4,000-year history in Israel. You tell me where the Indian community has that legacy in Uganda. I don't mind that at all, as I've said repeatedly. I think that's fine if they want to immigrate there and they're talented and they're running the economy and the Ugandans think that's fine. More power to them. But not when you, as a member of that community, start libeling Israel. And then they could easily say to you, you are a settler colonialist. You were put there, your community, by the British Empire to further their imperialistic conquest and subjugation of a native African people. And you stayed on and profited from their labor. And nobody does that. And it would probably be unfair to indict that community, but that's what he does. It's only Israel. So selectivity is the key to anti-Semitism.
All right. Well, Victor, there was one correction, or not correction, but just the other white basketball player that's been in the news recently is Sophie Cunningham. It was Cunningham, I think.
Yes.
Sophie, I know, is their first name. So anyway, we'd like to thank our audience for joining us on this Friday News Roundup. And thank you, Victor Davis Hanson.
Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching.
This is Sami Winc and Victor Davis Hanson, and we're signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Signal. Please like, share, and subscribe to be notified for more content like this. You can also check out my own website at victorhanson.com and subscribe for exclusive features in addition.